Hello, and welcome back to Timeline, where we break down world events with a timeline to analyze the foundations of these events. Today's episode focuses on the long-standing conflict involving Asia's superpower, China. Since 1949, there have been two Chinas, both competing for being the one true China, and recognition on a global scale. We are your hosts, Nate,
Allie, Travis.
And in today's episode, we will be breaking down the history of conflict between China and Taiwan. Some of you listening may see and hear on both social media and international news sources discussion of the heightening tensions between China and its neighbor, Taiwan. Often the news and social media will cover military drills and deployment of ships around the island of Taiwan, or the hostile stance China takes when a nation recognizes Taiwan as a separate entity. But why?
So, how did it all begin? The year is 1911. Following years of instability, China's monarchy is formally abolished in a quick and sudden coup, following the century of humiliation and the latter Boxer Rebellion of 10 years earlier. Famously in 1912, the democratic believer of democracy in the republic, Sun Yat-sen, would establish his dream of a Chinese republic that would of course be democratic. However, the young nation faced a major political crisis: stability of the new republic. Famously in 1913, the nation would give General Yuan the presidency, and by 1916, the republic shattered. This brings us on to the most famous era of Chinese history of the early 20th century, the Warlord era, from 1916 to 1949. Following Yuan's seizure of power, provinces declared independence and armies revolted. The national government famously fled Beijing and moved to the city of Nanking. The next 20 years were marked by constant conflict between different groups. However, two leaders would come to the main contenders of that one China: General Chiang Kai-shek of the Nationalists, or the Republic of China, and of course the now new General Mao Zedong of Communist China. Both were keen on claiming to be the one China and would actively fight against local provinces and their leaders in an attempt to reunify China. However, another nation would also attempt to seize on the long-standing ruin of China, that nation being Japan. Japan had already held concessions in China since 1900 and wanted more. Famously, in the year of 1937, armies of Japan invaded China. In 1937, that being the Marco Polo Bridge incident, leading to an all-out war. A united front famously formed, and peace was created among the shattered China, an attempt to beat back the Japanese onslaught. Following over 8 long years of war, with over millions of dead and hundreds of war crimes, such as the flooding of the Yellow River and the most famous rape of Nanking, it was over. However, after this short peace, the fighting resumed. General and leader of Communist China, Mao Zedong, now supported by the Soviet Union, which held several Chinese territories from the conquered Japan, such as Manchuria, would invade the Nationalists, or the Republic of China. Promptly, the Nationalists fled to Taiwan by 1949, and a one China policy was declared in 1949, along with the now unification of China, now under the Red Banner. Now let us look at, of course, the island of Taiwan itself, and a small history since 1895. Taiwan became and was Japanese-owned land in 1895, and all the way through World War II. But by 1945, the mainland China, the Nationalists, took control of the island with the help of the KMT, or the Nationalist Party. The legality of the takeover has been debated greatly among experts and several governments. Under this period of martial law instituted by the ROC, the majority of Taiwanese Japanese residents were expelled from the island, over 300,000 people, and the ROC established the Taiwan Provisional Government in September 1945, following the Japan's defeat in the Second World War. After World War II, the KMT was generally very corrupt and in worse standing with the people of Taiwan than the previous Japanese rule. This rule created a period of anti-mainlander violence, culminating in what became known as the February 28th incident in 1947, where tens of thousands of people were killed or arrested. In 1995, the 2006, the Memorial Foundation for 228 was established and started to give compensation for the victims of the crackdown. At the same time, from the 1930s through World War II, the Chinese Civil War was underway between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong's CCP. CCP gained control of mainland China by 1947, with over 2 million refugees fleeing to the island, mostly Nationalist Party members and military and business owners. They viewed the retreat as temporary initially, leading to a focus on military power over economic growth, but the retreat was in fact not temporary.
For the next 40 years, from 1945 to the mid-1980s, the KMT held control over Taiwan and several other territories such as Kinmen, Wuchu, and Matsu. During this time in the 1950s and 60s, Taiwan received economic aid from the United States of America while also moving their gold reserves from mainland China to Taiwan and used this to back their currency to stop hyperinflation, which was an after effect from the Chinese Civil War. In the 1970s, the Republic of China lost all their major international seats with organizations such as the United Nations in 1971, in addition to all intergovernmental organizations that were tied with it, being replaced by the People's Republic of China.
In 1975, Chiang Kai-shek died, and his successor as president was Yuan Shikai. While Yuan Shikai-'s son, Chiang Ching-kuo, took over the KMT and later became president in 1978. After this quick switch of hands, Chiang Ching-kuo is important because he recognized the importance of Taiwan gaining foreign help and support to secure their nation's future, and under his leadership, Taiwan began its government reform with loosened political control and a transition towards democracy. His rule is also the beginning of the Taiwanization movement to establish Taiwanese culture, society, economy, and nationality alongside identity for itself, rather than just being viewed as an appendage of mainland China. In 1986, Taiwan's first opposition party to the KMT was established, the Democratic Progressive Party, also known as the DPP. And then in 1987, the martial law was lifted, which allowed visits to mainland China. These moves managed to calm anti-KMT sentiments within the people of Taiwan and allowed for a much smoother sailing for the Taiwanese government of the time and moving forward. These democratic reforms and differentiation of governments furthered the whole two Chinas divide. The 1992 Consensus is the outcome of semi-unofficial meetings held in 1992 between the governments of mainland China and Taiwan. The results have mostly been interpreted that the PRC and the RCP both agree that there is one China, but they have very different interpretations for what that China is. The PRC claims that there is one China, including Taiwan, making the PRC the sole legitimate representative body of China, creating a one country, two systems ideology in mainland China and parts of Taiwan. The DPP of Taiwan has never acknowledged this outcome, though, and disputes any and all claims that both sides of the Taiwan Strait are one China united. Due to the absence of any cross-strait understanding between mainland China and Taiwan, Taiwan has been internationally isolated since the 1970s when it got kicked out of the UN. Taiwan's not allowed to attend several things such as the World Health Assembly, Interpol, International Civil Aviation Organization, or the United Nations Kimberley Process Certification Scheme. Other forms of this international isolation include measures taken against the Taipei Olympic Committee and the Golden Horse Film Festival Awards, alongside Taiwanese journalists being banned from acquiring passes to the United Nations and UNFCCC meetings. Many analysts argue that the PRC's coercive strategy of getting Taiwan to break after being isolated has backfired due to these measures actually strengthening Taiwan's foreign relations with allies such as the US, Australia, and the UK. After their election in 1996, Taiwan underwent rapid industrialization and economic growth, the Taiwan Miracle, becoming one of the four Asian tigers, which includes Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and South Korea, all countries that underwent rapid industrialization and economic growth between the 1960s and the 1990s. The 2000 election, however, marked the end of KMT dominance in Taiwan, as a member of the DPP actually managed to win the election. In 2007, Taiwan's president at the time established a policy of four wants and one without. The four wants being Taiwanese independence, Taiwan wanting the rectification of its name, Taiwan wanting a new constitution, Taiwan wanting development, and that Taiwan will be without a political left/right, only unification or independence. The prospect of Taiwanese independence did not make mainland China happy. In 2008, the KMT gained political dominance, and again, with the government of Taiwan leading to later student protests against the undemocratic methods the KMT had used. In 2014, inside the Parliament building, the DPP later winning back the presidency. Moving to more modern events, the tensions rose again in February 2022 after the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, where Taiwan began to focus more on military reinforcement after their public perception shifted and viewed China as more of a threat due to the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. In August 2022, Nancy Pelosi, U.S. Speaker of the House of Representatives, paid a visit to Taiwan, strengthening U.S.-Taiwan relations and causing even more tension between Taiwan and mainland China. As of late 2024, in October, China actually launched extensive military exercises near the Taiwanese border in response to President Lai Ching-te, and Taiwan has criticized the move, and the U.S. actually raised concerns over these rising tensions. And that mostly brings us to modern day, with tensions between Taiwan and China having existed for a while.
Now let's backtrack and take a look at the People's Republic of China, starting with their failed invasion of Taiwan in 1949, otherwise known as the invasion of Qingdao or Kinmen, where the PRC attempted a failed invasion to seize the outer islands of Taiwan. The following year saw the PRC's second invasion of the PRC's invasion of Korea and the latter military buildup in another attempt to seize the Straits. The first Strait crisis from 1954 to 1955 was a short conflict marked by the PRC successfully seizing several islands from the Republic of China, following their defeat at Kinmen. However, in 1958, the PRC would once more attempt another invasion of several more islands. This second attempt also failed and resulted in the world's first nuclear crisis. The People's Republic of China would attempt to seize outlying islands and would fail, causing a counter-naval invasion by the Republic of China. The United States would also involve themselves with Taiwan's aid. And with that, only a few days later, a ceasefire would be proclaimed between the three. However, the Republic of China and the PRC would continue to shell each other, primarily on Kinmen and Matsu Islands, on certain days that would last until 1979. Following this series of events, the People's Republic of China's foreign policy would undergo several dramatic and drastic shifts throughout the Cold War.
Starting in June 1949, about 3 months prior to the founding of the PRC, Mao Zedong announced the new China would support the Soviet Union in international affairs. The Truman administration then settled a policy that would mean that the United States of America would not recognize the PRC. This was because the U.S. had been supporting the KMT during the Chinese Civil War and refused to cut off relations with them. The CCP then regarded the United States as a threat to the PRC, as Beijing began seeking an alliance with the USSR to offset what they deemed the U.S. as a threat. Chinese and Soviet leaders signed the Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship, Alliance, and Mutual Assistance on February 14, 1950. This was mostly a military agreement which the two sides would come to aid each other if they were ever attacked by either Japan or the US. The Korean War disrupted any possible stabilization of any Sino-American relations. The PRC and the US were locked in a 3-year war in the Korean Peninsula. During this time, the Sino-Soviet alliance worked well as the USSR provided air support to the Chinese as well as military supplies and economic aid. During the first half of the 1950s, the Sino-Soviet relationship was top priority for PRC diplomacy, although in the second half the CCP began to disagree with the Soviets and the direction they were going with the international communist movement. The Chinese and Soviets began to quarrel over these matters, which were strengthened when the USSR refused to support China during its conflict with India in 1959 to 1960. In July of 1960, Moscow announces a removal of all Soviet advisors and technical support from China. Tensions began to rise along the Sino-Soviet border, and by the early 1960s, the alliance collapses. Shortly after, Mao Zedong and his administration began to reassess the changing balance of power in the two opposing blocs in the early 1960s. Perceiving the U.S. as a threat, they saw it as determined by domestic pressure and international challenges. Although Beijing was interested in maintaining communication with Washington, as the Sino-American ambassadors continued to have talks during the 1960s. Although there was no diplomatic relations that existed between the two, the talks proved useful in facilitating relations, offering an avenue for information exchange and crisis management. Because of the Sino-American relations, this causes the U.S. to stop recognizing the ROC in favor for the PRC. In the late 1970s, Deng Xiaoping becomes the ruler of the CCP after the passing of Mao Zedong. Deng shared Mao's goals to strive for China's equality and to restore its lost glory. He was the architect of China's foreign policy from 1978 to the early 1990s. During this whole exchange in power and alliances, the PRC has continued to uphold the belief that there's only one sovereign state under the name China, with the PRC replacing the ROC with that title.
The notion of one country, two systems actually carried on until fairly recently. In January 2019, Xi Jinping called for a peaceful reunification with Taiwan following the One China principle and the 1992 consensus, to which the president of Taiwan at the time, Tsai Ing-wen, stated that the government of Taiwan, the DPP in particular, never agreed with the 1992 consensus in the first place. President Tsai has also stated that she would never accept the idea of one country, two systems, and when she got re-elected in 2020, she stated that Taiwan is already its own country called the Republic of China. Furthermore, in 2020, the KMT chairman also rejected the notion of one country, two systems, which is shocking because the KMT is the party that kept closer ties with the PRC in mainland China. In 2020, the Taiwanese public also turned further against mainland China and the PRC due to the PRC's continued efforts to keep the ROC out of the World Health Organization in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2022, with the aforementioned visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan, China launched live fire exercises near Taiwan, to which Taiwan retaliated and deployed ships and aircraft. No military conflict occurred due to this, but the tensions between the two definitely rose even further. Though, notably, China did try once again to unify the two in later 2022. In 2023, China unveiled a plan for the economic integration of Taiwan into the Fujian province of China. Notably, cases of Chinese espionage in Taiwan rose after this, and the first Taiwanese individual was arrested in China for separatism. This brings us up to mostly modern day, where the tensions are still fairly high due to the last couple of years of interactions, and the relations between the two are very murky. Only time can tell where the relationship between China and Taiwan will end up.
And that was the China-Taiwan conflict summed up here on Timeline. Tune in next week for our third episode.